I always remember, her focusing up here and talking about this up here. And that was huge. The biggest time, or I would say, let me start this over. You might want to clip here. The moment that stands out most prominently for me in placement did not have to do with high voice. It had to do with a low voice. And her way of trying to get me to, she used words like, it's snarly, it's gravelly, it's gritty, it's grainy. And I'd make these sounds and I'd think, that is hideous. I don't want to sound like that. And she wouldn't let up. She kept at it. And I finally did get that concept. And I realized I can project in the low range with no strain, no pressure, if I will do what she's saying. Yeah. I just didn't like how it sounded, but it always worked. And that's the, I don't know if that has anything to do with placement per se. I do remember her talking about it a lot and emphasizing, if you're going to be heard in a big hall, you have to do this. You have to have it. So one more thing about placement was her phrase, it's like a tiny bright light in a deep dark place. To me, that was her explanation of chiaroscuro, which I don't remember her really using that term, but I do. It's a tiny bright light in a deep dark place. That also clicked. It made sense for me.
But the whole concept of placement,
yes,
was that something that she talked with you about?
Constantly.
Okay.
Constantly. Placement was it. I studied with two other teachers, one academically. I referred to Ralph Appelman. He had his vowelometer, and he would have people singing it, and he would show how far away from a pure E or a pure ah you were. And then when I was in Europe singing professionally in the opera houses in Europe, I studied with Burton Coffin, who was another very famous pedagogue. And he had this whole spectrum of things, I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Spectrograph?
Well, no, it was just a flat piece of paper, but he had documented that vowels tend to modify in a particular direction. And so if you were on, say, a C and you were singing an E, then it should modify in this direction. Well, basically, the two of them were just doing a 180-degree turnaround from what Harshaw was doing. You were just paying attention that the placement never wavered from where it was. And what would happen, much like someone, say, in a river and their head looks like it's stationary, but underneath your arms and your legs are flailing around, you are, in order to keep that placement stable, you are modifying a little bit here, a little bit there, in order to keep it in line. And that was her whole focus. No pun intended. She just saw me as a diamond in the rough, and boy, I was rough. So we literally just started with scales, and I'd start singing, and about the third or fourth, no, you're offline. No, you're offline. Okay, that was better. Now try it again. It was literally like just doing it over and over and over and over. And then when I was done with that, then we'd go do it over and over some more.
An old school method for sure.
Yes.
Forward, 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 especially because I grew up in the South, and it was my sound wanted to sit back. I tell my students that the Italian language helps you find that sense of up and over and out. That was just why you train in Italian first. And I'll say I grew up with my name here in Tennessee as Laura. My husband Dan from Philadelphia, it's Laura. In the Midwest, it would be more Lara, right? in Italy, it's Laura. The ah sits in a whole different frequency. I hear it in a different place.
Yeah.
It turns over. So if I only am going with what I know, my name is Laura, which is what I did when I went to Bloomington from Georgia. You know, my ah was there. And she taught me how to bring it into that place without that elaborate description that I mentioned, that the Italian language, you know, when you go back and read Garcia, they only vocalized on solfege, and those solfege syllables allows you to tune to the frequency of that pitch. So you're not going to be singing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Yeah.
That's why thirds and sevenths are hard to tune, because the tongue has to raise and there's got to be a sense of closure of the vowel. But the ah vowel, I mean, I have my singers sing a Caruso scale, which is E-A-O-I, E-A-O-I. And ah is influenced by E going up. It's influenced by U coming back down. Mm-hmm. So finding that sense of, you know, brilliance in the ah vowel. And, you know, she would talk about, I like to change the name placement to releasement, after what that Lamperti quote, that if this stays steady, that there's going to be a sense of your skull and the bones of your face and your sternum and certainly the hard palate. We want to find those hard surfaces, and that's going to give us forward a sense of balance, a sense of direction in the sound. But that gesture, I mean, she drew a skull with the up and over and out. Mm-hmm. Always, you know, she would think, you know, here, and, you know, that's what it feels like.
Certainly the third year I was in residence there, I think we spent as much time on that as anything. We my assignments in the opera program have become larger and more exposed, and the absolute necessity to sing a larger role without placement was wouldn't start the conversation, right? And so we talked about she certainly used the term nasopharynx. And the lifting thereof, and another big issue with her was my Southern accent, which she felt caused the tongue to basically occlude the space so that you couldn't get high placement. And so particularly she was very, very in terms of placement, the tip of the tongue would touch where the gum meets the teeth in the bottom, and it would basically nestle down into that area. So then you've got that doing that, and then you've got the soft palate. She didn't say soft palate a lot. It was more nasopharynx, pharynx and nasopharynx there. And certainly yawn position was a term I heard a lot. And she was constantly demonstrating, and the demonstration, I could see it as much as if it were today. She would go, oh, can you lift there? And of course she was, you know, doing push-ups with her back of her throat there to open that up, so that when I coupled that new, and by the way, all of that for me was brand new. That was new technique. I'd never heard any of that stuff. So I'm doing this, and I'm putting myself in position. But what I'm experiencing are new, vibrant sensations, right? And she would have me put my finger here on the bridge of my nose and see if I could feel some really high vibrations right in there. And she says there's a marker. She said, obviously you can't sing with your finger on your nose, but you can use that in your practice. So what about placement? Was that something you talked about?
That's something we talked about, and I always, of course, singing through the mask of your face, of course, she would talk about, imagining a hole far away and focusing your voice there. And that was always, crystal clear to me. Singing to the balcony, always that kind of stuff. One of the things that I didn't understand was, Miss Harshaw was adamant about you don't talk about technique in the hallways, and I would hear sometimes people talking about, Miss Harshaw said you aren't supposed to place your voice, and I would be like, okay, she just told me. And I didn't understand. I don't know what the confusion was there, but I never even mentioned it to her because I knew she would not like it if I had been paying attention to anything I heard in the hallway.
I think placement sometimes can for some people have a connotation of like sticking the sound and pushing it.
Yeah,
there.
Of course you didn't mean that.
No, of course you did not. Yeah. But so how did, in terms of placement, how did she explain that to you? What she wanted with that?
Well, there was a lot of lift that was involved in that inside here, and then focusing my mind. It was about my placement was always, to me, what she was saying was a mental endeavor. It was not a physical sensation endeavor. It was a mental, like aiming, but not forcing, but the concentration of that, tremendous concentration to do that. Yeah.
I already had a really resonant voice when I came in there, and like I said, I was popping out high C's and D's and even higher. She took me up to a high F once, and that, I remember that was funny. We were doing some stuff, and I thought, well, this is really high, but I was honking it out, full voice, and she stopped and she just said, that was a high F, and she said, well, spring has sprung. and I just, I was like, and then she took me low.
Yeah.
And I went all the way down to a low bass E flat.
Oh.
And that's when she just said, it's freak voice. It's just a freak voice. But then she said, but most of the time, the most freakish voices I've ever taught were tenors. They tended to oftentimes have extraordinary ranges, so hello. But I don't know how much of it I could use, but no, the placement thing, it was a lot of feeling on the inside. And she would talk about, trying to sort of make the space in the back to kind of sort of send the palette up that way. It was more of a, not just shoot it directly up, but more of a, and what I learned later is the inward smile, that you try and, using the levator muscles and try and pull. I thought, well, that's what she's saying, but that's what it was. And then you open up that, I think she called it a little trap door or something back there in the soft palate. I think Elizabeth Manning used to call it the ooh door. Where you would use the ooh vowel to send, and Harshaw said that once. She asked me once I came in for a lesson, she said, now, what do you think is the focus vowel? And, I said, E? I don't know. I thought it might be E. And she said, no, it's ooh. If you want to really learn how to focus your voice, and especially up high, you have to master being able to sing the ooh vowel. And that is, again, helps you open your throat a bit, oh, as opposed to singing ugh.
Yeah.
And so, but the placement still was right back up in there. This idea where if you look in Manin, this idea of drawing a line here and drawing a line here.
Yeah.
And where they intersect back there, that's the sweet spot. That's where you want to try and feel the voice, because then that will open up putting it in the mask. And she said, but not in the nose. Every mask you ever see, the nose is cut out. You don't sing in the nose, you sing in the direction of the nose. And so you put the voice back there and combined with everything else. And again, it's feeling it. It's not listening. It's feeling it. And so that's what you kind of had to do with the placement. But then there was also this idea of this. I'd be singing and she'd say, no, it's this and this. She said, I can't make it any clearer if it's a damn nose on my face. Here and here, And it's like, well, that's easy to do, but try to get your voice to do that. Mm-hmm. But she was right. I mean, it's you can. I've since seen all these charts and all this kind of stuff. That's exactly what she was saying. That it was all based in this exact same idea of just once you hit that spot and you feel it, it's like, and she would talk about how your voice feels like it's outside of you. That that sometimes it's I remember talking about Joan Sutherland. I was always curious about Joan Sutherland. George Hess swears that she taught Joan Sutherland. He swears it. And he talked to her a lot about it. But somebody had asked her why she always would sing like this. And Harshaw said, she's watching her voice. She's right there. And then you watch her sing, and you could see her kind of doing that,
And it made all the difference in the world, so that an open throat was now possible, where it really wasn't before. And the idea of it having a ping high and a place for that to be, and then allowing something to open up behind that, but to still sing in front of it. And that's one of the phrases I remember most was, yes, you open up in the back, but you sing in front of it. Don't open the back and then go to the back. Stop, trying to impress yourself on the inside. And that was tricky, because I was so in tune with learning from other singers too what it sounded like. But I was hearing it always on the outside, and so it took me a long time to realize what I needed to be doing and hearing on the inside that was really right. And she would do this thing with her bun every so often, and that was one of those, don't forget to open up back here. And I could see that from, the end of the hall. She would sit in the back row, and whether it was a jury or a recital or anything, every so often that had, a little bun action going on, which when I think about it now just delights me. And at the time I was like, okay, yes, right. It was being more dutiful.
Well, there's the thing that I think she said a lot about the little man who sits on the bridge of your nose and plays a trumpet. And every note you sing comes out the bell of that trumpet. That's a great concept of some might say focus. Well, I guess focus is probably appropriate there, but sort of getting your voice up into that high forward, and she would say tight place. And so that was one for sure. Another one that helped me a lot, especially in the middle voice for me, was she talked about these two little holes, which I believe were the maxillary sinuses, the openings, and feeling that the sound is focusing out there as I sing, which becomes the effect that it has is that the sound is broadened, deepened, darkened a bit, but not retracted. Not overpowered, not over covered, etc. So that's a sense of sort of sinus resonance that was specifically taught to me by her. She talked about, in fact, I have a drawing there. She said, "Feel nothing above your eyebrows," which at times doesn't quite line up if you think about resonance at the top of your head, which is conductive resonance at times, especially in higher pitches. But I think what she meant was not to focus higher than that. Yeah. So those were some things about placement, I might say, and of course the whole idea of placement is that's been made into a nasty word by some. I think as long as we understand that it's an illusion we create with our best resonance, obviously.
Yeah. I always tell my students, I say, it's not real.
Right.
There is no such thing. You can't measure it there. But if you're singing right, it seems undeniable that it's there.
Yeah.
And you have to feel if you don't feel that, then you're singing in your mouth, and that's what you get, a mouthy sound.
Yes,
And-
yes,
and
yes.
So, yeah.
Exactly. She did say that you need to, when you're singing well, what you hear is your natural vibrato, and you feel the fullness of it. So along those lines, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but we talked about the difference in core and focus. And the E vowel is sort of poster child, as I would put it, for core, which has to do with the breadth and the brilliance of the voice from the body, and U as the rounding and the focusing of it into that place that we deliver the tone. Yeah, so there's only so many things, right? I mean, singing is basically very simple.
Yeah.
We have lots of ways to describe it, and when we use sensations, some sensations say something to somebody, they may not say the same thing to somebody else.
Yeah.
But certainly, I'm sorry.
No.
Well, certainly the ongoing dynamic of the larynx that is breathed down, the palate that is lifted, therefore the high placement, the high forward placement. And she often talked about we go back in order to go forward. She gave me, along those lines, and this has to do with breath management, the idea of shooting an arrow. And I always ask students, now, trick question, I warn you, this is a trick question. Which arm works the hardest? Your left one. No? Okay, so, well, no. They have to oppose each other. You create the energy, and then you get a result, right? So there was this sense of being very aware of some energy that goes back and even down, so that the voice can go up and out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Context again.
It's all of this opposition, You go back to go forward, you go down to go up, you go up to go down.
Right.
Yeah.
I think she maybe even mentioned it once in a lesson about rowing a boat. You're pulling the oars, okay? So the oars are going that way, you're going that way. Or you do this, the oars going there, you're going forward,
I think she would, if she had a superpower, and she certainly did, at least one, it was finding ways of explaining these things.
Absolutely.
She was always quick to say, there's no Harshaw technique.
Right.
But there certainly was a Harshaw pedagogy.
Yes, there was, and you may have had this experience. I did at my first full-time teaching job. I went into a studio where 2 former Harshaw students had taught. And of course, I was 28 years old or something, or maybe younger, probably younger. I thought that maybe the method they had been taught, if there were one, was like 180 from what I understood. And it seemed to me like, well, if we're all teaching the Harshaw technique, somebody totally misunderstands it, because there seemed to be no commonality there at that time, and that was just my ignorance and short-sightedness, largely, I'm sure.
She said she tried so hard to get me not to drive it forward. So placement, she wanted it bridge of the nose, which I think I know I tried really hard to get it there, but I sometimes, when I thought about this, wasn't always thinking about the space to balance it out. I remember a lot of discussions about space and making sure that it's a Roman cathedral, not a Gothic cathedral back there. That was one of her big ones. And to keep all the space open, and then I don't know if she use the knitting needle analogy, which she would say, you think of a knitting needle going in your head and coming out this way, and another one going in that way, and wherever they intersect, that's where the sound should be.
Right.
And so that was kind of the placement. But even though she told me that, I had a really hard time coming out of the other thing I was trying to do. I some of the things she said to me about me were offensive because, about the driving the voice, but on every account, she was right. I just, at whatever, my early 20s, I wasn't ready to hear it.
And she started talking about low breath, low larynx, big back up pharynx. And it's not that these things were utterly unknown to me, but nobody had really discussed them. And nobody had been specific as to just how much space you could make if you worked on it a little bit. She started with me on E vowels because E, she clearly noticed, was my unfavorite vowel. And it was a real revelation to me that you could actually sing an E vowel and not have it be like right in the front of your face, that the vowel was somewhere else. And I refer to this as the incredible disappearing uvula act. She said to me, I want you to pick up your uvula and get it out of the way. And I was completely stymied, I thought, what? So she said, make your uvula go away. And I said, how? She said, well, when you go home, find the brightest place in your house, probably the bathroom, look at yourself in the mirror, open your mouth, and make your uvula go away. She said, it might engender your gag reflex, but don't worry about that. She said, you won't throw up your lunch or anything. Okay, so I went home, and that was my task for the week, and I figured out how to do it. And obviously, as you all know, it was a revelation to realize that if you looked in your mouth with your uvula out of the way, all of a sudden you had this amphitheater in the back of your mouth, that your pharynx and the back wall of your throat just kind of went like that. And so when I went back for the next lesson, she was very pleased that I'd figured out how to do that. And then proceeded to explain to me that the direction of my breath / voice / noise was going to be kind of an isosceles triangle, with the base being the front of my face and the angle going that way, and the straight part, the 90-degree angle, was going to come out right through the bridge of my nose. And she explained to me, and I didn't really understand it until a while later, just how much noise you would hear in your sinuses when you were singing. And none of it was nice noise. It was rattly, and it sounded like pulling in a radio station through your rear molars, and it was just nothing that I had ever associated with singing. And somewhere in those 4 weeks, I don't think it was more than 4 lessons, maybe 6, she basically said to me, the worse it sounds to you, the better it will sound to the listener. And of course, it takes a while to stop listening to the sound that's coming out of your mouth and trusting the paradox that the worse it sounds to you, the better it sounds to the listener. And the other paradox of having to go back in order to go forward. Because so many of us heard, either through earlier teachers or the grapevine or colleagues who may or may not have known anything helpful, that, well, you don't want your vowels to be back, you don't want your voice to sound murky, you want it all to be in the front. And from my vantage point, the actual opposite is true, that if you don't go back, you won't get to the front in the best possible way. You might get resonance in your nose, but you won't get it in your sinuses, and that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. So she started me on E vowels and gave me exercises that were mostly about accessing resonance. And some of them were like a train whistle. There was a chromatic major third going up by half steps, and she said, this is not about breath. She said, I don't want a lot of vibrato. I just want you to feel as much buzz in the front of your face as you possibly can, and you can't feel too much. And so there I was, sounding like, the 745 pulling out of Trenton, and she was she was delighted, and from there we went on to exercises that obliged me to create maximum space at the top of an octave, and then slur all the way down to the bottom so that I could learn to keep that level of resonance in an area that was not naturally as prone to resonance. So there I was for my 4 or 6 weeks of lessons. And at the end of them, I went back to do a second year of Peter Brook's production of Carmen, which was called La Tragédie de Carmen. I'd spent a year in France, in Europe doing it, and then we did it at Lincoln Center. And at the end of the first rehearsal, several people came up to me. They weren't singers, they were actors, and they all said, "You sound different." And I thought, "I do?" And they said, you sound better than you did last year." And I thought, well, I guess I've come to the right place. And that was that. Mm-hmm. So I never worked with anyone else again. And she changed my life. She always said that I should listen for that noise between my ears, absolutely not concentrate on what I thought I sounded like or what was coming out of my mouth. That was not my job. My job was to focus exclusively on the feeling of resonance. And so that was it. She wanted everything riding above my cheekbones, really. I do remember her saying that one's mouth was a poor resonator, mm-hmm. and that she always told me, I don't know if she told it to other people, but obviously I needed to be told to close the front of my mouth a lot, particularly in the middle and lower register. Because, she was busy working on teaching me how to open the back. Mm-hmm. And so if I was wide open in the parts of my voice that were naturally less resonant acoustically than the higher register, then it was harder to keep the sound really narrow and pointed. And it worked really well. She used to make me put a pencil between my teeth. And so, she'd say, well, you can't open the front because the pencil will fall out. So where are you going to open? So, you open in the back.
Interesting.
Yep. But the whole idea of creating this artificial space, really, that your body would ordinarily not do, was so eye-opening to me. And over the years, I've had so many students come and say, well, I've been told that if you can speak, you can sing. I don't think there's any relationship between them at all. Because if you put your speaking voice back where your singing voice is, your speaking voice drops a third and gets 3 times as loud. Just because you found your singing space, your vowel home, And so I went forward from meeting her thinking to myself, okay, my vowels, they all have to live in the same cave. They have to live by my ears, and they're right next to each other. And if they're right next to each other, it matters a lot less which vowel you're singing. I used to hate to sing E vowels because everything came forward into my mouth. And all of a sudden, it didn't matter what vowel I was singing, or it didn't matter much what vowel I was singing, because it was the same hole back there, That was just, it was amazing.
Well, she was amazing.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It really was.
Of course, we would talk also about how sound comes up, up the back of your head and then out in between your eyes, and that's where the voice speaks. Has nothing to do with the mouth whatsoever. You know, and another concept that was absolutely foreign to me. Obviously, sound is issuing from my mouth, but the way the sound travels was from right here. And so, oh boy, do you ever watch Pavarotti singing? Boy, you could see he was looking at his voice while he was singing. You could see him doing it. You could watch any video of him that you want, you know, like, okay, I'll go and watch, I go and watch, you know. And of course you could see that perfectly. And so I tried very hard to to find this placement. And yeah, she talked a lot about ooh vowel, which was important to her because ooh was the best, brightest focusing vowel that existed, and everything ran through it, as far as she was concerned. So, and boy, if I ever wanted to make a decrescendo on a high note, well, I better clap an ooh down right in the front of it, or else I will never be able to bring it back in the same spot, or I have to flip to like a falsetto or something, which was always hard for me. But you know, so that was a very important thing for her as a focusing vowel, and that's how. If I wanted facility with any vowel in any place in the voice, it had to be sent through that sensation. And really, we're just talking about thinking it. You know, it's not like you could say ah with a ooh in front of it. That's not what I mean at all. It's a mental imagery of ooh sitting in front of your face, and that you have to sing through that ooh in order to give it the focus and the squillo that it needed. So those were all important concepts for her.